My name is CRIT13, and in today's video, we're going to be comparing the new WAVEBREAKER versus the Catch R5. In today's videos, we're going to be using Raiden and Xiangling as our guinea pigs, but a lot of the patterns that we're going to be seeing in today's videos is probably going to apply for many of the other polearm characters as well. So just keep that in mind that even though we're using Raiden and Xiangling specifically, we're going to be coming to conclusions that apply to pretty much the whole cast of polearm characters. I also was unable to pull myself a WAVEBREAKER'S fin. I actually managed to get myself a Staff of Homa before I could get myself a WAVEBREAKER'S fin. So I have no footage of this weapon, unfortunately, but by the power of math, we can still figure out how this weapon compares to the Catch. So the math that I'm going to be plotting today is both average damage and crit damage, because the Catch gives us that extra crit rate on our elemental burst attacks. So if we don't account for that extra crit rate, then we aren't going to get the whole picture. So average damage is 100% necessary in today's video. Before we get into it, really quickly, the WAVEBREAKER'S fin is a new limited 4-star weapon, very similar to the Akomaru and the bow version of this weapon, and it has a very high base attack, 45. This ends up giving you 620 base attack once max leveled, but the substat here, attack percent, is only 3%, so when fully leveled, this is very low. I think it's around 18% once max leveled, somewhere around 18%. The passive effect here increases your elemental burst damage only, depending on the combined elemental burst cost of your entire party. The maximum you can reach is only 40%. So depending on the team setup that you run, this damage bonus is either going to be lower or higher. You also cannot reach exactly 40%, even if you run a full team of 80 cost characters or Raiden and then 3 80 cost characters. You get really close, but not quite there. Let's go ahead and do these comparisons. Let's just jump right into it. We're going to be taking a look at Xiangling first, and she's built in a pretty classic manner. She's either going to have attack percent or energy recharge on her Sans piece, a pyro damage goblet, and then a crit rate circlet, because we're pretty much forced to use crit rate since none of these weapons gives us extra crit stats. In terms of substats as well, we're going to have 10 total rolls into crit, 5 into crit rate, 5 into crit damage, which brings us to about 50% crit rate and 100% crit damage. Throw in a couple of attack percent substats as well, and we reach a character that has about medium amount of investment, pretty average. So here you can see that I am plotting both the Catch versus the WAVEBREAKER with average damage, and then I also plot it with crit damage. This first table is the average damage, and this second table is the crit damage. So the average damage is going to be very important because the crit rate is different between these two weapons. So let's take a deep dive into that first. So we plot the Catch running attack percent Sans, WAVEBREAKER running energy recharge Sans, WAVEBREAKER running attack percent Sans, and then the Catch running energy recharge Sans. The 3 ones that are really important here is the first 3. You should never run the Catch with energy recharge because you're just overflowing in energy recharge. So there's pretty much no reason to do this, but I added it just for completeness sake, but you can pretty much ignore this. So taking a look at average damage for the Catch versus the WAVEBREAKER, the 2 ones that is most similarly comparable is the Catch with attack percent and WAVEBREAKER with ER, because it gives us enough ER for Xiangling to be able to pop her elemental burst comfortably. The Catch is going to have slightly less energy recharge than the WAVEBREAKER, about 5% less energy recharge, but that's really not that much. And as you can see, the damage, I should say the average damage, is actually a lot better than the WAVEBREAKER. The damage that's plotted here is also 11 ticks of the Pyronado, so you're going to hit 11 ticks if you happen to have your Xiangling at C6, because it extends her Pyronado duration by about 40%. And then Guoba here, this is 4 ticks of Guoba spitting fire, but sometimes Guoba doesn't hit all of his attacks because he's so stationary, but it's included here just for completeness sake. It doesn't really matter because everything we do here with the Catch ends up being stronger. Guoba, Pyronado, and swing damage is better than the WAVEBREAKER with energy recharge in every single way when it comes to average damage. In terms of percentage, the swing damage and the Pyronado, there's about 15% damage difference between these two. So the red bars here, that's about 15% damage difference, and the blue bars, that's also about 15% damage difference. With Guoba, it's a little bit less because this weapon doesn't give us any extra damage on E-skill damage, so it makes sense that this is going to be lower. It's only 6.16% damage difference. And then obviously, if you run the Wave Breaker with attack percentage, it's going to be the strongest in terms of average damage, but you lose out on a lot of energy recharge. We only have 120% energy recharge here because we're running 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. But you know, if you have a myriad of energy recharge substats to put you comfortably, then Wave Breaker with attack percent might actually be your better choice, since it is doing a lot more damage, even in terms of the average damage. But of course, that comes down to RNG and how well your substats are. If you have energy recharge substats, at least a lot of them, then you might be lacking in the crit or the attack percent or the elemental mastery department, which can change a lot of things. But in general, this is kind of how things play out. So we took a look at the average damage, but we should also take a look at the crit damage, right? Because the crit damage is when you actually see those numbers in game. So that's a little bit more reflective of what you're actually going to see. Average damage is more of something that's a little bit more abstract and you won't really notice in game because crit rate is a random thing, right? It's all down to chance. So when we take a look at crit damage, it turns out that the catch still does higher crit damage numbers. So objectively, the catch with attack percent is better than the Wave Breaker with energy recharge. And the reason why we compare these two is because we're trying to balance that energy recharge. So even when you actually hit these crit damage numbers, it's better if you run the catch with attack percentage. And then of course, if you run Wave Breaker with attack percentage, that's going to be the best. But that relies on a lot of energy recharge subsets. Now in terms of percentage, there's now only a 5% damage difference between the catch and the Wave Breaker right here. And Guoba will obviously stay the same because there's no effect on E-skills. So it's about 6% there. Now the difference between the catch and Wave Breaker is about 12.34%. So that would be this column here and this column here, but specifically just the red and the blue areas. So when we take a look at crit damage, you know, our difference really is only about 5%, which is not a lot for some, but can be pretty significant as you deal more and more damage over time. So that's the Wave Breaker for Xiangling. Let's go ahead and move on to Raiden Shogun. So again, we're taking the same approach, both average damage and crit damage, because the catch gives us that extra crit rate. And we're going to be looking at two builds, the double attack percent and then the attack percent and electro damage bonus, as those are the best sets that you can run with the catch. And actually, as it turns out, with the Wave Breaker as well. As for the damage bonus that I chose here, it was a little bit tricky, but I decided to go with two values, 37.2% and 32.4%, because this is what a typical team would probably look like for the Raiden. 37.2% is a national team, so this team would consist of Raiden, Xiangling, Bennett, and then another flex 80 character. So this ends up giving us 37.2% extra elemental burst damage. So as you can see, it doesn't quite hit that 40%, and we're only missing 20 energy. So, you know, the amount of energy that your team has really does make a difference. And then the 32.4 is a team that looks like Raiden, Sara, Zhongli, and Kazuha. This is a 90, 80, 60, 40 team. So notice how if you run a 40 energy cost burst character on the team, that your damage bonus really does go down by quite a bit, 5% here. So let's just really quickly show why I decided to just go with these two sets, because just for the sake of simplicity, it made the most sense. So as you can see, the blue bar is the ER and electro damage, and then the green bar is the double attack percent. And it is quite the difference. So if we take a look at the damage percent difference, there's about 15% damage difference between double attack and ER and electro damage. So that's quite big. I just wouldn't use this set if you have a Wave Breaker or the catch. The damage difference is a little bit too great. Of course, this assumes that you're not using Sara or Bennett as well, which can give you just flat attack bonus, which can change things. But if you're not using those two characters, then I just would not consider this as an artifact set to use. So that's why we are deciding to go with these two sets. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the charts that we have here. So the first one is R5 the catch versus R1 Wave Breaker. And you can see that even with our 37.2% damage bonus, our average damage versus the catch is still very much lower. In terms of percentage, let's go ahead and take a look at that. So in terms of percentage damage difference for our elemental burst damage, if we look at the initial slash, it's about 7.5% damage difference. And I think there's a calculation mistake here. It says 6.6, but it should be about in line here, about 7.5%. So there might be a calculation mistake there. But yeah, there's about a 7.5% damage difference. And then when you have 32.4% damage bonus, that changes to about 9.61. Our E skill here is not really affected, and they're very similar in damage. the catch wins out by just a tad in terms of average damage, it turns out. So, you know, since the R1 Wavebreaker doesn't quite match the average damage of the catch, how much refinement is needed in order to actually catch up to the catch? We move on to R2, and just looking at the graph, it's not quite there. It's really close, but still doesn't quite hit it. We go to R3, and it's still not there. Just barely. But of course, if you manage to go with a 90 and then triple 80 cost team, then it would probably catch up to the catch, or maybe even slightly surpass it. But R3 is about when the Wavebreaker catches up to R5 the catch. And the damage difference here is very small. This is like less than 1%. So taking a look at the table, yes, it turns out that it's only 0.25% damage difference. And with the R2, it's about 3.5% damage difference. So that's Wavebreaker and its refinements in order to reach the level of the catch in terms of average damage. What if we add a little bit more crit rate and crit damage? Does this change anything? Does this affect how these two weapons perform relative to each other? It does change a little bit, but it doesn't change a whole lot. So I decided to add 15% extra crit rate and 30% extra cooldown just to illustrate the very small, minute differences that the crit actually makes. So when we do that, the catch's crit rate jumps up to a massive 81.5% and 150 crit damage. And with the Wavebreaker, we have 69.5% crit rate and 150.2% crit damage. So as you can see, when we plot them side by side, Wavebreaker is still less than the catch in terms of average damage on pretty much everything. But if we take a look at crit damage, then the Wavebreaker ends up dealing slightly more damage. So when you're in game and when you actually hit that crit hit, you will see bigger numbers with the Wavebreaker, but when you consider the crit rate and the average damage, the catch is going to give you more damage in the long run. Of course, this is crit rate, so it does come down to luck. So in the odd cases where you're really lucky, then the Wavebreaker can deal a lot more damage than the catch. But that's randomness, and average damage is supposed to cut out that randomness. But as you can see, the damage difference is not that huge, even when it comes to actually hitting that crit damage. And it actually looks like the catch deals higher E skill damage, although just very slightly. Let's go ahead and take a look at the percent difference there. So in terms of average damage, the percent difference was 7.6% in favor of the catch. And then when we actually hit crit damage numbers, the damage difference is less than 1%, 0.85% damage difference. But of course, this is an R1 Wavebreaker, so once you hit more refinement, when you actually hit crits, the Wavebreaker is going to widen this gap even more. But yeah, that's pretty much R5 catch versus Wavebreaker. In general, the catch is going to give you better average damage, but the Wavebreaker will give you actual higher crit damage numbers, albeit ever so slightly higher crit damage numbers. But you know, the reason why you would pull this weapon isn't because of the damage output that this weapon does. The reason why you would want to pull this is because it allows you to use Xiangling and Raiden at the same time in the Abyss, especially if you don't have a better weapon for Raiden like her signature weapon. That's really the main reason why you want to pick up this weapon. They're very similar in that sense, so being able to pick this up and able to use Xiangling and Raiden at the same time definitely allows for more team comp variety, and is the reason why I really wanted to get this weapon, but I couldn't get it. Sad times, but it is what it is, and we're just going to move on. But anyway, guys, that's all I got for you guys in this comparison video between the catch and the Wavebreaker. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys. You should come check out the Discord and the Twitch channel. Links to that are in the description. Don't forget to hit the like button. Comment down below if you managed to get a Wavebreaker and if you are using it on one of your characters. And until next time, guys, I will see you guys later.